The Glog Lab Report versus the formal lab report. This lesson was designed for 7th grade science and the unit using the scientific method. I picked this lesson because in the past I've had a hard time motivating students about the scientific method and getting them to turn in complete lab reports and taking pride and ownership in their lab reports. The purpose of this lesson was to determine the effect of using digital resources to collaborate with peers, experts, and other audiences on the student's ability to apply the scientific method and the student's motivation to complete a lab report. I predicted that using the digital resource to collaborate with peers and the teacher will increase the student's understanding of the scientific method and their ability and motivation to complete the lab report. This will be indicated by a higher score on the post-assessment. During this lesson, students designed an experiment and then either created a formal lab report or a glog to communicate their findings with their peers. Students completed notes and several activities before designing an experiment to become familiar with the scientific method. There were several learning outcomes or grade level content expectations for this lesson. 3 came from grade 7 science inquiry process, and 3 more came from grade 7 science inquiry, analysis, and communications. There were 4 Michigan educational technology standards met during this lesson. First hour and fourth hour both applied common software to enhance communication with an audience and to support creativity. They also used a spreadsheet or database to make predictions and assist with solving a problem. Both hours also evaluated available digital resources and selected the most appropriate one for a specific task. First hour, in addition to the other 3, used a digital resource like the Glog to collaborate with their peers, experts, and other audiences. For the lesson in the first hour Glog class, students were given a pre-assessment on the steps of the scientific method before the lesson. They were then divided into groups of 2 or 3, where they designed an experiment based on an investigation question about M&Ms. They then performed the experiment and analyzed the data with their groups. Students were then given a rubric for a formal lab report, but applied it to a glog to present their findings and results to the class. The students worked on these glogs for 2 days in the Media Center Computer Lab until they were complete. At the end, students were given a post-assessment on the steps of the scientific method after the completion of the glog. The formal lab report 4th hour was also given a pre-assessment on the steps of the scientific method before the lesson. They were then divided up into groups where they designed an experiment based on an investigation question about M&Ms. They performed their experiment and analyzed their data with their groups. The students were given a rubric for a formal lab report and completed a rough draft in class and then typed up a final copy at home. And then they were given a post-assessment of the steps of the scientific method after they turned in their formal lab reports. 3 instructional strategies were used during this lesson. Cues, questions, and events organizers were used during the planning of the experiment with a graphic organizer. Cooperative learning was used when the assignment of the groups and the experiment planning and implementation. Generating and testing hypothesis was used when the students designed their experiment and then carried it out. All instructional strategies were used in both first and fourth hours and chosen from Using Technology with Classroom Instruction That Works by Howard Pittler and others. The students were given a pre-assessment that had 2 sections, a prior knowledge section and a survey section on how they felt about the scientific method. A majority of the students in both first and fourth hour scored a 50%, a 2 out of 4, on the prior knowledge section of the pre-assessment. On the survey section, the students were to rate 3 statements about the scientific method from 1 to 3. 1 equaling very true, 2 equals kinda true, and 3 equals no way. During first hour, a majority of the students rated all three statements as kinda true. The students were then given a chance to write down how they felt about the scientific method.
Scientific method is really hard to memorize.
Scientific method makes me want to crawl into a turtle shell.
The scientific method is too hard.
The scientific method is too much work.
The scientific method has too many steps.
On the survey section of the pre-assessment for 4th hour, a majority of the students also rated all three of the statements as kind of true. They also were given a chance to write down how they felt about the scientific method.
Scientific method is confusing.
I don't know all the steps of the scientific method. The steps are confusing. I don't understand the scientific method at all.
This is an example of the 1st hour Glog Report. The students broke the formal lab report into 3 sections. One section to be completed by one group member in each of the groups. The first group member completed the section about the title, the purpose, and the hypothesis, and created a glog, which they then linked to a materials and procedural glog. And they linked it to the next person's observations, analysis, and conclusion glog, and then they linked it to a data analysis graph for the final glog. This is an example of student work from the formal lab report 4th hour class. The students used a word processing software to type up a formal lab report. They also used a database or spreadsheet software to create tables and graphs for data analysis. The post-assessment had 2 sections, one on knowledge and a survey section on how the students feel about the scientific method. On the knowledge section, in 1st hour, a majority of the students scored a 100%, which is a great improvement from a majority of the students scoring 50% on the pre-assessment. In 4th hour, a majority of the students scored 100% and 75%, which is an improvement from the pre-assessment, but not as much as 1st hour's improvement. On the survey section of the post-assessment for 1st hour, the students had to rate 4 statements from 1 to 3, just like they did on the survey section of the pre-assessment, with the exception that there was a new 4th statement for them to evaluate. I know all the steps to the scientific method and how to use them in everyday life and how to communicate my results from my lab experiment and a lab report were all rated very true. I really enjoy learning about the scientific method and applying it in science class was rated kinda true by a majority of the class. This was surprising since this was the class that got to use the Glog as their lab report. The students were given a chance to comment about how they felt about the scientific method and using a Glog after the lesson. Their comments and how they evaluated the statement, "I really enjoy learning about the scientific method and applying it in science class," was interesting, because from the comments it sounded like they really liked it, as when they rated it only kinda true.
I really enjoyed doing the glogs. They helped me understand the experiment more thoroughly.
I love doing the glogs. I wish we could have eaten some of the M&Ms. It's a great way to teach.
It was pretty alright.
Glogs are really fun. I'd rather do a glog than write out the lab report.
I'm not sure how I did on my conclusion paragraph.
I loved the glogs. They made science class a lot more fun, and instead of just writing, we got to be independent and figure things ourselves.
On the survey section of the post-assessment for my 4th hour class, all 4 statements were rated very true by a majority of the students. The statement, "I really enjoy learning about the scientific method and applying it in science class," was even rated very true, which I found surprising since my first hour, who got to use the Glog, only rated it kind of true, and this class rated it very true when they had to write up a formal lab report, which can be a daunting and intimidating task for a 7th grader. These students were also given a chance to comment about how they felt about the scientific method and typing up a formal lab report at the end of the lesson.
Good, and it wasn't too hard because you explained it for us well.
It was easy. In fact, the only difficult part was finishing the experiment itself due to time constraints. However, the report was a piece of cake. No, it isn't. I looked at it 3 times and got someone else to look. It clearly is a lab report.
It was fun and easy, and I did it all on the computer, so my mom wasn't very impressed when I showed it to her.
The outline made it really easy and understandable.
So, would I use Glogs again? You bet. The students really enjoyed it, and for the most part, first hour scored better on their post-assessment, and all the Glogs were done on time, therefore supporting my hypothesis. I did have some unexpected findings, though. Scheduling first hour for 2 days in a row in the computer lab was challenging. It was very busy at our school. First hour, kind of true majority, on the statement about really enjoying the scientific method surprised me. I expected them to rate it as very true since they got to use their Glogs, and they seemed to be very motivated once they got started. Glogster was also very user-friendly and easy to set up. There were no glitches in the system, and it worked perfectly every time. Glogster also has nice privacy settings, so that our Glogs can only be viewed by the teacher and their classmates and not everyone else on the internet. This was a relief since sometimes this can be a concern with some parents. Finally, this technology can be used by all the teachers and students in all content areas for an array of projects. In the near future, I hope to share Glogster with my colleagues at my school so that all the students at our school can experience Glogs for themselves.